Well, I've been waiting for quite a while for somebody with way more clout than me to do a video on this subject, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So sit back and enjoy and watch the video that's probably going to get me the most hate I've ever received. Enjoy. As many of you quite well know, it is forbidden for a fully Torah observant person, usually an Orthodox Jew, to light a fire on Shabbat, according to Exodus 35:3 that says, "Do not light a fire in any of your dwellings on the Shabbat day." Shabbat is one of the chief pillars of Torah observance, and violating it is one of the biggest sins in Judaism, and it is why the punishment is the same as murder. According to Numbers 15:32 through 36, we read something extremely interesting. Now, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day, and those who found him gathering the sticks brought him to Moshe and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then Hashem said to Moshe, "The man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp." So as Hashem commanded Moshe, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. Something I found interesting in this account is that the man known according to Rashi as Zelafechad wasn't even stoned for lighting a fire. He was stoned for three other reasons. Number one, plucking, which is a category of harvesting which is forbidden on Shabbat. Number two, heaving, which is a category of making sheaves. And number three, carrying objects in a public domain. All of this is with the intention to light a fire on Shabbat. And for this reason, he was pelted with stones. Stoning, incidentally, is thought in Judaism as being a worse punishment than being burned. It's no wonder that the Jews have volumes upon volumes of laws pertaining to what is permissible to do and not to do on the Shabbat based off this incident alone. I don't think Messianics think about this enough. The Shabbat is a sign that is to accompany the generation of the set-apart people of the Kadesh Baruch Hu, that is the Holy One, blessed be He, and it's something that can't be allowed to deteriorate over time due to negligence, lest it sever a vital connection to the priestly class of mankind to the Creator of the universe. The reason there is such a harsh punishment for breaking the Shabbat is because it is essentially an attack on Hashem's sovereignty, because it denies the preparation of a person for the Messianic era. How so? Well, the idea of 6 days is meant to represent the 6 millennia of the world leading up to the 7th millennium, which is the era of Mashiach. And by using the week as a preparation, as it were, for a taste of this age, a person can actually train himself to really be ready for this time. The idea is to use these 6 days, especially the latter days of the week, to prepare for this time where no more acquisitions are available, and fire, being one of the chief provisions given to man, is central to this theme. It's very interesting to note that the Sadducees interpreted this prohibition to mean that no fire at all should burn on the Shabbat outside of the temple service, but this is incorrect, as fire may be left to run its own course on the Shabbat. Orthodox Judaism completely prohibit the use of automobiles on Shabbat as a violation of multiple categories, including lighting a fire, extinguishing a fire, and transferring fire between domains, which is the final melakah of the 39 categories of prohibitions of Shabbat observance. But before we get into that, it's important to look at another aspect of this issue. If one studies the text concerning Shabbat very closely, they'll notice something else in Leviticus 23:3a. It says, 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Shabbat of solemn rest, a set-apart convocation. The word convocation is quite an archaic one, not used much outside of religious settings, and simply means a gathering. But does this mean that it is okay for a fully observant person to do one sin on the Shabbat to keep a different commandment on that day? The answer is no. It is forbidden to do a mitzvah which would cause one to do a sin first. In Hebrew, this is called mitzvah haba'ah b'veira, which means a mitzvah achieved through a sin. Many people think that Yeshua altered the Shabbat in some way, but I'm here to tell you that he not only kept the Shabbat, but he was the master of it. Any instance of his apparent breaking of it was usually done to help a person, or it was an act of incidental kindness. Notice I said kindness here and not convenience. Keep these two distinctions in mind as we go forward. He said whilst addressing his peers, the Pharisees, in Luke 14:5, "Which one of you having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Shabbat day will not immediately pull him out?" A fully Torah observant person is absolutely permitted to break the Shabbat if there is a life risk. Rabbi Mattia ben Haresh said, "He who has a pain in his throat, they drop medicine into his mouth on the Shabbat because it is a matter of doubt as to danger to life. Any matter of doubt as to danger to a life overrides the prohibition of the Sabbath." Now this is taken from Mishnah Yoma 8:6. We must also understand that Rabbi Mattia ben Haresh was not the author of this principle, which means it was an existing principle. Some leaders believe that based on Yeshua's reiteration of Hosea 6:6, which says, "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of Elohim rather than burnt offerings," is a valid premise for tolerating driving to a place of learning and prayer on Shabbat. They then cite further sources that exhibit examples of this, like the aforementioned pasuk in Luke 14:5, and also in John 7:23 that reads, "If a man is circumcised on the day of Shabbat, so the Torah of Moshe is not broken, do you murmur against me because I have healed a whole man on the Shabbat day?" This concept is reinforced by a quote from the Talmud that says, "Rabbi Eliezer answered and said, if circumcision, which attaches to one of only 248 members of the human body, suspends Shabbat, how much more shall the saving of a whole body suspend the Shabbat?" This is taken from Tractate Yoma 85b. Now this is all a great exegesis, but an exegesis for the preservation of a person's life, even providing first aid, because no one can ever really be sure if something isn't actually life-threatening or not, which is a concept that was indeed forgotten by Rebbe Yeshua's detractors in his day. As far as I know, no one who ever drives on Shabbat has ever woken up from an unconscious state whilst already driving in a car against his will, nor has the car miraculously continued to drive coherently, turning down different streets until it comes to a halt in an empty parking space next to a shul. Never have I heard of the engine turning itself off by itself and the door swinging open of its own accord to allow the person to step out and walk into a service on Shabbat. At no time has this and will this ever happen. There is no life risk here, no hunger causing one to have to pick heads of grain to eat, and there is no ox or son stuck down a well, and certainly no withered hand or paralytic waiting to be healed. Driving on the Shabbat is not a matter of a person finding himself in an unfortunate situation that needs rectification that is otherwise permitted on the Shabbat. It is a premeditated and habitual act of breaking the Shabbat for the sake of convenience. Ladies and gentlemen, the majority, and I'm talking 99.9% of the Messianic world who consider themselves fully Torah observant, at least in their capacity, and they'll admit that they're learning and not getting everything right, drive on Shabbat without a care in the world. Very few of them even know of any so-called halakha within the Messianic world that supposedly permits such an act. As it stands, one halakha, which I'll paraphrase here, says, "For the sake of the knowledge of Hashem, one may drive to a place of learning on that day." Now, the halakha, in its full description, rightly acknowledges that lighting a fire on Shabbat is prohibited, but it simply gets around driving a combustion engine by calling it kindness to tolerate it. This is insane. The question is, how long is it tolerated? In my experience over the years, most people, and I mean most people who drive to shul on Shabbat, continue to do so for the rest of their religious life. This is actually a fact. We have the benefit of over 30 years of history of the re-emerged original faith of the Talmudim of Yeshua. But what is the most mind-blowing is the almost complete absence of teaching within the Messianic movement to try and wean a person off this practice. In fact, I have yet to see any teaching along these lines. You could actually be witnessing history by watching this video. So what is the solution? And what if the Messianic world took this seriously and started to avoid driving on Shabbat, especially when many of them are scattered all over the place in different countries? That's a very good question. One of the main ideas of Shabbat and its observance is to draw and bring a community together. If a community who purports to follow the Bible doesn't uphold the Shabbat in this way, the community remains spread out and scattered. And herein lies one of the problems. One of the other problems that I've noticed is that there is almost no teaching on the conversion process of a Gentile in the Messianic movement, despite the fact that 99.9% of the movement is made up of Gentiles, people coming from church backgrounds and so on. At no time is figured into the equation the three stages of a returning Gentile. That is the Ger Teshav, the returning Gentile, the Ger Hashar, the Gentile near the gates, denoting someone who is near the gates of learning, and the Ger Zedek, the righteous Gentile. All of these three stages follow under the umbrella of a Noahide. Now, if this is the first time you've heard the word Noahide, and you've been a Messianic for maybe a couple of years, that is absolutely mind-blowing. This should be something that's front and center of all newcomers to the faith. In the book of Acts, we read something very interesting. In Acts 15:19 through 21, it says, "It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to Elohim. For the Torah of Moshe has been taught in every city from the earliest times and is read in the synagogues every Shabbat." And if we go a little bit further into Acts 15:28 to 29, we get a little bit more of the picture here. It says, "It seems good to the Ruach HaKodesh and to us not to burden you with anything beyond the following requirements. You are to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. You will do well to avoid these things. Farewell." And again we read in Acts 21:25, "As for the Gentile believers, we have written to them our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, and from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality." Notice there seems to be no requirement to keep the laws of Shabbat here. I can hear you all breathing a sigh of relief. There is a mention of the Shabbat, but not specifically that it has to be part of what is observed. After all, Shabbat is a very major pillar within Torah observance for Orthodox Judaism, and it is rightly heavily guarded lest its overall observance begins to gradually slip over the generations, which without question has done so with the appearance of Reform Judaism and the like. But why should the Messianic movement risk adding to its dilution? In Judaism, a Noahide is a righteous Gentile who refrains from idol worship and believes in the same Elohim as the Jews, and therefore is actually considered a convert and a member of the Jewish nation. That's right, you're actually considered a convert if you are a Noahide, that is a righteous Gentile. They are given the status of a slave who is owned by a Jew, I know that doesn't sound too good, but bear with me, and the status of an Orthodox Jewish woman if they progress in their observance. This means that they primarily uphold the 7 laws of Noach and perhaps observe other customs out of respect for Jews. The reason why I say that a Noahide is equivalent to a slave owned by a Jew is not to say that they are slaves to Jews, but that is to say that they simply carry the same expectations of observance as a person with this station in life. That is, refraining from idolatry, blaspheming the name of Elohim. Be careful, all you sacred namers who say the name flippantly in whichever pronunciation seems good to you. They refrain from murder, forbidden relations, stealing, and eating the limb from a living animal, and they establish and uphold laws. If a righteous Gentile believes in the same Elohim as the Jews, and they are not permitted to observe the Shabbat like a Jew, why would they in a million years go out of their way to drive on Shabbat if they don't have to, when through the study of the Tanakh, which is what they are expected to do, know the sanctity in which the Jews hold the Shabbat and what they do to uphold it? For example, a Jew, heaven forbid, who murders someone, they are still considered a Jew and are still eligible to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. But if a Jew breaks the Shabbat, they are no longer considered a Jew, or at least their Judaism is on suspension, and they cannot be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Okay, so does this mean that Messianics can drive on Shabbat? Well, like I have said, most Messianics think that they are observing the whole Torah correctly or to the best of their ability, and they don't in any way acknowledge that they are actually Noahides, and any suggestion to do so would be met with a negative reaction, at least initially until the dust settles. But in Judaism, it is taught that a righteous Gentile who observes the Torah pertaining to them is considered to be on the same or even higher level than the high priest of all Israel. After all, even a male Orthodox Jew has laws that only pertain to him that do not pertain to Orthodox Jewish women, and an Orthodox Jew in general have observances that differ from Orthodox Jewish Kohanim. According to the written Torah, an Orthodox Jewish non-Kohen can't even marry an Orthodox Jewish Kohen. So there are different requirements in Torah observance depending what your station is in life. It is way beyond time that the Messianic movement should acknowledge that they are actually Noahides, righteous Gentiles, distinct from Orthodox Jews. Now, this is going to take a great deal of humility and a change of emphasis in learning. As a Noahide, a person is still considered a member of the Commonwealth of Israel in their capacity, and yes, they still have a place in the Olam Haba, the world to come. Without a doubt, being a Noahide reduces the margin for error, and it relinquishes a person from the grave danger of driving on Shabbat. If this course of action is not taken, the prohibition of starting a new religion is violated, and a person thrusts himself into countless other disastrous situations. So, in summary, driving on Shabbat for a person that refuses to walk the path of conversion and sticks to a flimsy halakha that subplants convenience for mercy will not end up in a very good place, let's just say that. Anyway, thank you for joining me on this long overdue Weird Hebrew tale. Thanks for watching, and bye for now. If you like the content of this channel, get a hold of this book. It is literally jam-packed with information you will not find in most Torah publications. Its pages include topics like the fable of the money-hungry Jew, the lie that propelled the Holocaust, the real root of anti-Semitism, Rightly Dividing Mashiach, which contains startling truths about the Messiah you will not read anywhere else, Judaism in the New Testament, updated information about the creation of the Golem and the false Messiah, the commandment to wage war, the truth about the Shield of David, a compendium of all the false teachings in the Messianic movement to help you navigate what is truth, biblical capital punishment, and why you should be frightened of sinning, the significance of the land of Israel, the obligations of the student, the eye in the triangle, sanctified sex, how to think like a Jew, and much, much more. There is also an updated chapter 1, and along with all the other chapters, has hundreds of footnotes and references. This is a a book that took 10 years to research and compile and will be a welcome addition to the library of any discerning student of Torah and Mashiach. Get it today on Amazon and other online bookstores. Bye for now.